Okay, so let's dive into something pretty fascinating. A recent conflict overseas didn't just stay overseas. Nope, it sent a massive shockwave right through the American conservative movement. We're going to unpack how that all went down based on a really sharp analysis by Andrew Corner. When the conflict kicked off on October 7th, 2023, the ripple effects went way beyond the Middle East. Right here in the US, it did more than just start a few arguments. According to the analysis, it basically ignited a civil war on the American right, cracking open these deep fault lines that, turns out, were there all along, just waiting for a reason to split. And man, this split happened fast. We're talking almost overnight. On one side, you had this camp of just unwavering, unconditional support for Israel's right to retaliate. Think comments like Jordan Peterson's, "Give 'em hell." But as the fighting dragged on, a second camp started to form. These were conservatives who were getting really uncomfortable with the human cost and began to ask, hey, wait a minute, has this gone too far? And then, just when you thought things couldn't get more tense, the situation became absolutely explosive. The assassination of Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA, was like throwing gasoline on an already raging fire. His death wasn't just a tragedy, it became a powerful symbol that made this whole ideological fight deeply personal, and it just drove the wedge between the two sides even deeper. So pretty quickly, this battle of ideas turned into an all-out war of words. As things got more and more heated, people started creating these new, really charged labels to draw the battle lines. And one term in particular, it just started to take over the whole conversation. All right, so who were the main players in all this? Well, you've got some established voices like author James Lindsay and the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh. Then there's the powerful legacy of the late Charlie Kirk. And you also have this rising influence of youth movements like Nick Fuentes and his Groypers, who really started to challenge the old guard. And here's that term that really became a weapon, woke right. It was coined by James Lindsay, and it was basically used to smack down any conservative who dared to question the pro-Israel consensus. According to this analysis, if you criticized Israel's actions or even just the U.S. alliance with them, you risked getting hit with this label, and that effectively painted you as an enemy on the inside. And listen, the rhetoric got extreme. I mean, look at this quote. Lindsay isn't just disagreeing with the young conservatives questioning foreign policy at those turning point events. No, he's labeling what they're doing as demonic grouping. He's taking a political disagreement and framing it as a spiritual battle between literal good and evil. But here's the thing. According to the author, this whole fight isn't really just about politics or labels. If you're willing to dig a little deeper, what you actually find is this profound theological disagreement right at the very heart of it all, a split that divides American Christians into two fundamentally different camps. Okay, so check this out, because this is really the core of the whole issue. You have two groups of Christians looking at the exact same conflict, but they're seeing it through two totally different biblical lenses. The Zionist Christians, they see a biblical command to bless Israel, and they see the conflict as David, which is Israel, fighting the Goliath of Islam. But the covenantal Christians see it differently. For them, the church is the New Jerusalem, and they're increasingly seeing the Palestinians as David fighting the Goliath of the modern Israeli state. They're literally reading from the same book, but coming away with two completely opposite moral stories. So this deep religious divide, it doesn't just stay in the realm of theology. Nope. It bleeds right over into a really fierce philosophical debate about the very nature of politics itself. It stops being about policy and starts being about something much more existential. Who's with us and who's against us? And commentator Matt Walsh really boiled this down into stark, personal, emotional terms right after Charlie Kirk's death. He basically argued that the distinction is simple. The people who mourn with you, those are your friends. The people who celebrate your loss and dance on your grave, those are your enemies. It's a really raw, deeply human way to draw a political line. But, and this is a huge but, critics immediately heard that and connected it to a much, much darker chapter of intellectual history. They argued this wasn't just an emotional gut reaction. They said it was a direct echo of the friend-enemy distinction, a political theory from a guy named Carl Schmitt, who just happened to be a notorious jurist for the Nazi regime. So you can imagine, that accusation just escalated the whole debate to a completely different level. James Lindsay drove this point home hard. He argued that this whole framework reduces politics to its most demonic, most divisive level. For him, it didn't even matter if Walsh meant it that way or not. He said that once you embrace that logic, you're embracing a poison that has been used throughout history to justify totalitarianism and mass death, all by defining your political opponents as existential enemies who need to be destroyed. So, In the middle of all this fracturing and name-calling, the author points toward a different way forward, a way out of this binary friend versus enemy cage. And it's a path found not in some dense political theory, but within Christian scripture itself. This passage from Galatians is held up as a radical counter-argument to the whole thing. It proposes an identity that just completely transcends the very categories at the heart of the conflict: your nationality, your ethnicity, your social status. The idea here is that real unity is based not on who you're against, but on a faith that you share.
And this quote takes it even a step further, challenging that whole idea of tying faith to a specific piece of land. It suggests that true worship isn't confined by geography or by national identity. It directly questions the theological premise that any single modern nation-state could hold a uniquely sacred status over all others. So, as we wrap this up, the analysis really leaves us with a critical question, doesn't it? In a political world that seems to be screaming at us constantly to just pick a side and demonize the other, what is the actual price of unity? And maybe more importantly, is there any path forward that doesn't require us to create an enemy in the first place? That is definitely something to think about.